Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Do you hear me well? Please do that like this. Great, thank you. Hi and hello to everybody. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm super excited to open this event on behalf of Bצלאל, Teaching Center of Art and Design. In the next 90 minutes or so, we will hold a conversation with Mr. Yaanis Varoufakis. Please use the chat for asking questions, please in English if you can. And we will try to direct them to Mr. Varoufakis throughout the conversation. We hope to answer as many questions that you have. We cannot promise that we will answer all the questions. We recommend you to use the speaker view on your right-hand side on the browser of the Zoom app, so you can see the speaker view. With me is the artist Dr. Miry from the Fine Art Department in Bצלאל, who will introduce Mr. Varoufakis. We hope you enjoy and benefit from this talk. Thank you very much all for joining. Miry.
Good evening, everyone. I'm deeply honored, excited, and really happy to have Yaanis Varoufakis today with us. Yaanis, we are sitting here at this strange agora of an art school, a virtualization of an agora, in fact, to hear from you what is worth fighting for in the post-corona era and how it should be done. But before we get into that, let me just briefly introduce you to our audience, our students and colleague here. Yaanis Varoufakis is a Greek economist, academic, philosopher, and politician. Currently, he is a member of the Greek parliament representing the MERA 25 party, a party he founded that has the evocative name of the European Realistic Disobedient Front. That's translated into English. In 2015, he served as Minister of Finance of Greece, but resigned after a referendum in which he actually won. Following his resignation, he co-launched DIEM 25, the Democracy in Europe Movement 2025, whose aim is to inspire, suggest, and create an alternative to the crisis in the European Union. DIEM 25 is forwarding a pan-European infrastructure for Democrats for a radical rethinking of solidarity, alter globalization, and ecology. To set up the movement, Varoufakis has teamed up with some prominent figures in the cultural field, such as the musician Brian Eno, the filmmaker Ken Loach, the philosopher Slavoj Žižek, fashion designer Vivienne Westwood, to name only a few. Professor Yaanis Varoufakis, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are truly honored. Where are you speaking from?
To begin with, the honor is all mine. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's this is an agora of sorts. It's better than the so-called market of the neoliberal era, which also means agora in English, but is exactly the opposite in reality, because where the neoliberal market begins, debate ends. It's just the part of the dollar that rules. I am speaking from a small island called Aegina, which is off the coast of Athens, of Piraeus, a stone's throw, about an hour on the ferry. We live here on a hill, and we can see the Aegean. We are just ridiculously privileged. I feel very, very ashamed to be in isolation here in this place. But at the same time, what can I do? It's quite brilliant. Thank you very much for having me. I can't hear you.
Okay. I want to, just a second. Yeah. So I want to go to our first question, which relates actually to the name of MERA 25, which stands for the Party for Realistic Disobedience Front. And I want to ask you, what is realistic disobedience?
Well, let me tell you the story first. After my resignation in the summer of 2015, when people were, successful in opposing the powerful by a fantastic referendum, the next day the people were overthrown by a government, which is usually, the other way around. But this time it was the people that were overthrown by the government. I left, and then I was disheartened. I was demoralized. People were pushing me to create a political party in Greece. I just couldn't do it. So it took 6 months before I got active again, but this time at a transnational level. I just, the idea of a small party in a small country where we would be again promising all sorts of things to the people of Greece with a very, very limited capacity to deliver. Just, I just couldn't get out of bed in the morning to do it. But when some friends in Germany said, well, why don't we start a pan-European movement? I thought, wow, that is something I want to fail trying to do. Because, I always take it for granted that every progressive movement fails. But, the whole point is to fail well and for something good to come out of the failure. It's something I really wanted to fail at. So we started the Democracy in Europe movement, which of course we took from Carpe Diem, right? Seize the day, Carpe Diem, 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 Democracy in Europe movement. And we added 25 because we wanted to add an expiry date to the movement, saying that, that was in 2015, we started thinking about it. We have a decade, let's, go out with a bang 10 years from now, because Europe is going to go out with a bang if we continue doing, business as usual when business cannot be maintained as usual. So we started in Berlin. And then we did very well. Within a few days, we had tens of thousands of members with no money, no backing, no media, and so on. To cut a long story short, at some point we decided that, even though we had very, very good policy papers and agendas and ideas on how to, to change the economic policy of Europe, or monetary policy, social policy, green energy, green transition, ecology, social policy, and all. We had a fantastic agenda, but then we realized that nobody cares, because unless you compete in elections, ideas count for precisely zero outside academia, art schools, and so on. So we may have great fun exchanging ideas, but I was getting a bit old. I mean, this year I'm 60, so I thought, I want to make a difference before I die. I spent all my life in academia writing papers that 20 people read. So this self-indulgence had to end somewhere. So we ran in elections. I ran in Germany. This was a provocation. I, a Greek that was very much hated by the German oligarchy, I ran in Germany in the European Parliament elections. I didn't do magnificent. I got 135,000 votes, which is not too bad. But we also ran in Greece, and in Greece we managed to enter Parliament. So in Greece we have a 3% threshold to get into Parliament. We got that threshold, so we elected 9 MPs. And when we had to come up with a name for the Greek party, we just translated DIEM, which means day, into Mera, which is the Greek version of DIEM, of day. And then we had to find what this meant in Greek. So, so we decided to be playful and say this is the realistic, the European realistic disobedience front. It's a bit like Monty Python, in The Life of Brian. The People's Liberation Front of Judea versus the Judean Liberation Front. So, but, I think it's important to have a sense of humor. But also we meant it, because we were the party of realistic disobedience. In the same way that I do believe in realistic utopias, because the only alternative to having a realistic utopia in your head is to simply head for dystopia.
Great. Ori, you want to ask something?
Yeah, it's really interesting for us if you can elaborate a bit about, you are an economist, and yet you open a political party, and your co-founders or the people that you work with are philosopher, music producer, fashion designer, film director. It's kind of weird, don't you think? Like, what was in your mind about that? How did this came?
Well, look, some time ago, I gave a lecture last year, which I really enjoyed, on Shakespeare. I was invited to give a lecture on Shakespeare. And of course, I thought it was a joke because, in Britain giving a lecture on Shakespeare. If you're a Greek economist, you know, it's, but anyway, because I use quite a bit of Shakespeare in my narrative, I was invited to do that. And in that I answered your question because, you know, I left Greece when I was 17. I had a classical Greek tradition, you know, with ancient Greek tragedy being a central part of my problematique, you know, from Sophocles to Homer and whatever. And for me, mathematics was the gateway to economics. So I went to England to study economics through mathematics, which I still find fascinating, poetic, beautiful, wonderful, musical. And then I saw how the economists were using it. And it was just like, you know, it's like watching a massacre. It was like, you know, butchery, mathematics mutilated for the purposes of coming up with a very silly view of capitalism, a mathematical model of capitalism in which capitalism is impossible. And I thought, my God, they are building whole, you know, pyramids of ideologies here, of mathematical models, of economic policies, of fiscal policies, of monetary policies, on a model of capitalism which precludes capitalism. I sought solace. So I dropped economics and I continued with mathematics and I went back to Shakespeare and all, you know, all that stuff. And I realized that on the one hand, people like Adam Smith, you know, one of the classical economists, and Shakespeare had very parallel narratives. And for me to understand the way that economics built its own raison d'etre, I did it better through art, through theater. And then later, so, you know, when my first book was called Rational Conflict, and it was a book designed to fail because it was philosophical, but used mathematics. So those who cared about the philosophy couldn't understand the mathematics, and those who understood the mathematics didn't give a damn about the philosophy. So it was bound to be read by 10 people, you know. But still, I did it for myself. And I think that's, you know, then I met my wife later, who's a wonderful artist. And first I fell in love with her work before I knew who she was. I went into an exhibition, I saw an installation, I was absolutely gobsmacked. And then, you know, but I noted the name. And when I met her again later, I thought, you are the artist there? So, you know. And then I became her assistant. You know, I was a full-time professor of economics. But fun was to be had by, you know, assisting her in her installation work, which took us around the world. So I was carrying her cameras and I started seeing the world as an economist, but through the artist's eye. And that's when I started realizing I started understanding globalization through an artist's eye. So for me, you know, I hate socialist realism, even though I'm a socialist, because socialist realism is just the exploitation of artists. You know, you have an ideology, you have a program, you have this, everything is decided, and then you take an artist and you do what Goebbels did, right? Go and run the propaganda. Use your art to run the propaganda. That is not on. For me, until and unless you start understanding economics, finance, policy through the artist's mind and eye, you are not progressive.
Brilliant. Miry.
Okay. So I want to continue with understanding economics and ask you, in your introduction to the book, Talking to My Daughter About Economy, you said that economics is too important to be left to the economists. And we, of course, are not economists. In fact, we are, in a way, in the culture which is hostile to the economical system. Can you please help us understand what is going to happen right now, or what should happen in our democracies with respect to the economics? In particular, the new private debt of workers that became unemployed and self-employed, that lost everything as the result of the corona crisis.
By the way, I have to tell you that today, here in Athens, we had a major demonstration, even though it's illegal because of the, you know, the quarantine. Yeah. We had a remarkable, spontaneous demonstration in the middle of Athens by thousands who joined in solidarity with artists, artists, with actors, and so on and so forth.
The cultural sector was hurt dramatically in this crisis.
Yeah, because the actors who make a little bit of money in the theater and then they have a second job in a bar, they had a double whammy. The theater closed and the bar. So look,
and the bar owners, and it's like complete sectors that were just erased, and that are going to be the new. That's the new debt. And what is going to happen to this new debt is my question to you.
Well, there were two parts of your question. The first one was about, the art world versus the economy, or the economist's view.
Yeah.
Well, I'm on the side of the art world against the economist's view. And the reason for that is because economics is not a science. We would never say this about physics. You never say the artist against the physicist, because the physicist is essential in order to understand how the world works. The economist's job is to obfuscate. It's to distort. There can be wonderful economists that unveil the truth about capitalism, but they never get the teaching positions in the best universities. To get the teaching positions in the best universities, and therefore to become, established as an economist, you have to adopt a model of capitalism in which there are three things are missing: capitalism, money, and debt. Can you imagine? I'm serious now. I'm making an allegation, and I challenge any economist, from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, from Harvard, to come out and contradict me. Because I've studied all this stuff, but I studied it as an anthropologist that embeds himself in a tribe to understand the tribe, not because I believe their moronic beliefs. I can tell you the most sophisticated, beautiful mathematical models of capitalism lack money. And you may not know sufficient mathematics, but I think you can understand why. Let me put it this way: suppose you try to model an economy that has 5 commodities, bread, iPhones, machines, corn, five, it could be N, but let's say 5, okay? Commodities and services. And how do you do it? If you are a liberal economist, you say, okay, demand must equal supply for each one of those 5 industries. Demand depends on price, supply depends on price. So you have corn. The demand of corn must equal the supply of corn. Both are functions of the price of corn. So one equation with one unknown, the price of corn. A second one for machines, a third one for iPhones, okay? So you've got a system of 5 equations in 5 unknowns. If you add a 6th one, which is money, you can't solve it. You remember that from high school. If you've got a system of 5 equations with 6 unknowns, can't solve it. So that's why I know it's not a model.
Plane that solves the equation.
So a model that has no money cannot have debt. And so you have all the, if you go to the Israeli government now, to the finance ministry, and you ask them, show me your models. Very complicated models that predict inflation, this, that, and that. They have no money, no debt, and no capitalism in them. Okay? So my job for the last 3 decades, maybe more, was to expose that economics is not a science, it's a religion that uses mathematics in order to confuse people, like astrologists, they use computers, this and that, but astrology is not a science, it's bullshit, right? No comparison with astronomy. So this is economics. Okay, that's the first part of the question gone. So don't feel bad if, as artists, you reject the language of economists. You should. What's going to happen? Well, nothing good. Nothing good, because, the powers that they present the coronavirus as a terrible catastrophe that hit us when everything was going smoothly. Not true. Things were not good before the coronavirus came. We should resist a return to normality, because what passes for normality was a dystopia. In 2008, capitalism had a major spasm. It was our generation's 1929. In the same way that if you look at the world before 1929 and after 1929, they're very different. You cannot explain the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s in terms of anything that was conventional wisdom in the 1920s. Similarly with 2008. 2008 was a major breaking point. turnaround, a discontinuity in mathematical terms. Because in 2008, the banking system collapsed, completely gone, finished. And it was revived by governments and central banks printing rivers of money, tsunamis of money, to refloat finance. But that money never managed to do that which it used to do under capitalism before, more or less, to become investments into jobs, into things humanity needs.
To go back to the market.
Yeah, I mean, the market, financial markets did magnificently well. But so let me put it this way, to understand it. Between 2008 and last February, we had the largest amount of savings and liquidity and money in the history of the world. A mountain, right? Globally. And we had the lowest level of investment into things humanity needs, like, good quality jobs, like food, like green energy, even cars that we don't really need. The investment was there and savings were there. So there was this gap. When you have this huge gap, you have all this money slushing around trying to find things to do. Because the worst nightmare of a banker is to have money that he doesn't do anything with. It's a nightmare, The whole point is to lend it, right? So they lent it. They gave it to Apple. They gave it to Google. They gave it to Volkswagen. But Apple, Google, and Volkswagen already had savings of their own. And they didn't want to invest in more gadgets for two reasons. Firstly, because if they produced more of them, their price would come down and their monopoly profits would disappear. And secondly, because, the people are there, the multitudes, because of austerity, because of austerity everywhere, didn't have the money to buy the stuff. Yeah. So the companies got this money. What did they do with it? They didn't invest it. They bought their own shares. Okay? Because if you buy your own shares, you take, the government, the central bank gives you loads of money, right? Why take the risk of investing it in something that may fail? You go to the stock exchange and you buy, if you're Apple, you buy Apple shares. If you're Volkswagen, you buy Volkswagen shares. Immediately the share price goes up and your salary as a CEO is linked to the share price. So, suddenly you're rich. So that's why inequality went crazy and why most people are living precariously. Most people cry to bed at night, either because they work, in precarious jobs and 0-hour contracts and all that, and they can't make enough money to see how they will have a future, so they can't sleep at night, or they hit the opiates, drugs, whatever, right? Or they have decent jobs, but constantly fear that they will lose them, or constantly fear they need to upgrade their marketability within their own companies, and they work all night and all day and all weekend, and they have nervous breakdowns. The shrinks do really very well. That was the situation before the coronavirus. And meanwhile, all this liquidity created zombies, corporations that had this remarkable combination. First time in the history of capitalism. They were insolvent and profitable. Now, you just need to mention that to realize the immensity of the irrationality. Take a bank, Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank since 2008 is bankrupt and yet profitable. How can you be bankrupt and profitable at the same time? You can, because if your liabilities, your losses are gigantic, you owe 50 times the GDP of Germany, right? However profitable you may be this year, that next year, you can never repay what you owe. So, these big banks, big companies, after 10 years of this, what I call socialism for the rich and austerity for the many, what happened was that, this system becomes toxic politically. Why are the fascists doing so very well everywhere in the world? Everywhere, in your country as well, right? You've got him in power. In my country, the Nazis have infiltrated the right wing, and now in not so much in government, but in power, because racism has become completely entrenched now with the right wing governments. You have Matteo Salvini in Italy. You've got, should I mention the T word in the United States? Trump and Bolsonaro and Modi in India. The reason why all this discontent is rising up, converting into anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, hating everyone, who is not exactly as you imagine the right person to be, is because of this total, disconnect between the available money and money that goes into things that humanity needs. So the coronavirus has simply pricked that huge bubble. And now, we are, as I say, we're on a saddle and we can tip either way. I would like to imagine that, we will manage to unite because as progressives across the world, unless we create a transnational, progressive international movement where we join together independently of whether we are, Greeks, Arabs, Palestinians, Jews, whatever, Germans, Dutch, Icelanders, unless we do that, we are done. Because the bankers and the fascists internationalize. They are the only true internationalists. A German banker and a Greek banker are brothers. They get together and they look at each other as if they are, of the same family. They support each other. They always manage to find ways of pushing all the governments to support each other. Same thing with fascists. Put two fascists in a room and they get on like a house on fire. We progressives, we were the Judean People Front versus the Liberation Front of Judea. We are always divided, and the result, we are always losing. So, we started with DIEM 25, Great Merit 25. Now we have something called the Progressive International. We are hoping to get together in Reykjavik in Iceland with the fantastic Prime Minister of Iceland, a good friend, Katrin Jakobsdottir, with people from Nigeria, from Laos, from India. It's a small progressive international movement that we're building. Noam Chomsky is magnificently helpful. Bernie Sanders and I started this in November 2018. Then he was distracted by a catastrophe that unfolded in the last 12 months called the United States election. But we're trying. This is also something which is worthwhile failing at.
Yeah. I got a question which to you, which I also see that people in the chat, it's marvelous, people asking many questions, but this is a question that is similar to one of the questions that we have in the chat. It's going to be long, so stay with me for a minute. I want to ask you about growth and prosperity. We live under the assumption that growth is endless, but an infinite thing, especially in economics, but in our resources are very limited in the most physical sense of this planet, of the physicality of this planet. Is growth an absolute must for economics, or can we find a better formula that includes climate and human prosperity inside this equation? Can we find any kind of new measure for that? And if yes, if you believe that we can, so this question goes to what can we, the people, do about it?
Look, I have to tell you that every time I hear people telling me we need a new measure, I want to die. I just lose the will. Because it's like saying, the temperature is too hot. Let's get a different thermometer. No, we need to do something to reduce the temperature, not to change the measurement. Capitalism is a system which is predicated upon the expansion, the triumph of exchange value over experiential value. Yeah? So all the things that you and I enjoy doing, whether it's art or beautiful sunset, friendship, telling a joke, yeah? Capitalism needs to commodify it. Only through commodifying it, turning an experiential value into exchange value. So people tell jokes for money. Then suddenly it's no longer funny. Or it is funny, but they don't have fun. Maybe they're crying inside while they're doing it, right? So exchange value began with the enclosures in the 18th century in Britain when the landlords evicted the peasants because sheep were more lucrative than turnips. And so they replaced the peasants with sheep. The wool was an internationally traded commodity even in the 18th century. And that expulsion meant two things. Firstly, the land suddenly became commodified because I could associate every acre of land with the price of wool that it would grow or could be grown on it. And then the peasants became the proletariat, because suddenly you had people who had no connection with the land anymore. They were expelled from the land, and they knocked on doors and they said, "I will work for a piece of bread." That's the first labor market. So capitalism began with the commodification of land, of labor, and then with everything. Women's wombs are being hired to rich couples who want them to be surrogates. Genotypes are patented. Now Luxembourg is doing a roaring trade by offering contracts, property rights on asteroids. You knew that, right? Yeah. So, everything is being commodified. I mean, soon, if they could commodify the sun and, chop it up in small pieces and sell it. So that is capitalism. That system, okay, has its oeuvre, it has its dynamism out of this process of constant growth of exchange value. GDP is a fantastic measurement of this. Nothing else matters. So, if some trees burn down that don't belong to the public, they have no GDP value. The GDP goes up if fire engines rush towards them to extinguish them because of the diesel you expend, which has exchange value. So what is the solution? The solution is not to start measuring the value of trees. The solution is to have different property rights and a different social and economic system, so that we do not live in a network whereby we are all motivated to burn down trees and to replace them by, expensive ashes. So that's why I'm a socialist. And anyone who says to me that they're an ecologist and they believe that capitalism consists with ecology and all we need to do is to have something other than GDP to measure thing, I say, boring.
Thanks for the answer. Miri.
Oh, by the way, I didn't answer one point which I think is important, and I need to honor that question. Endless growth. Now, you're artists. Is there any limit to the growth of art? No. Is there any limit to the growth of poetry? No. Is there any limit to the growth of caring for people? No, and there shouldn't be. Is there a limit in the amount of cement we produce? Yes. The amount of CO2? Yes. The amount of, four-wheel drive cars? Absolutely. So it's the question of what grows. I believe in endless growth of beautiful things that are absolutely consistent with a sustainable planet and society. And I believe in destroying everything, which is not. Not even not growing it, but destroying it.
Yeah. Thanks. Miri.
Ori, can you see the questions from the audience, Ori?
There are plenty of them. So wow, so many questions. Let's pick one of them randomly. I'll do it randomly.
Maybe take Uri. You see Uri Aviv question?
Yeah. I'll need glasses for that. This is a long question, so I hope.
That's my problem also, by the way.
In your 2015 TED Talk, you proposed to eliminate the working poor through technology. The working poor will be eliminated only when there's an economic incentive to eliminate them. They are more expensive than the robot replacements. And when that happens, many of them currently become a non-working poor. The political sphere is completely frozen in many parts of the Western world, unresponsive to the evolving and deepening crisis that continues to enrich the already obscenely wealthy by converting more and more labor into capital. How do you see a non-ludite solution to this cycle? What can we, as Israelis and global citizens, can do about this?
That's a good point. Look, technology is not going to do much good if it's still owned by the tiny minority that own all means of production. The dream of a totally automated world is really not materializing, because while you do have complete automation of certain activities like car factories, assembly plants for, the Apple iBook Pro, whatever. Now these are completely automated. There are robots putting them together. But at the very same time, in the same city, you've got the rise of precarious labor. The third world is seeping into the first world with, Americans in particular, doing shitty jobs, soul-destroying jobs, while next door there is an automated factory. So technology is not going to be the solution on its own, as long as we don't change the property rights over wealth-creating machines. But imagine that I'll answer the question in a kind of practical way. Imagine that we had a movement that started small, but had great ambitions. That we said, what we want to do in Israel, in America, in Europe, whatever. We want to create a social equity fund in which every company that employs more than, X people, largest companies, not huge companies, but largest companies and huge companies. If you want to function in our country, in our economic bloc, you have to transfer 10% of your shares into this equity fund. And the dividends accumulate, and then they become a universal basic dividend. Everybody gets it. At the beginning, it will be a trickle. Very, very, small amounts of money for everyone. Okay? But as automation goes up, and you have more and more production by fewer and fewer people, then as long as some of those profits find themselves in the pockets of even people who actually care for people, artists, carers, lazy bums, doesn't matter, whoever, then they can buy stuff and the cycle continues. And imagine that as this takes hold, in the next election, we promise to increase this from 10% to 20%, to 30%, to 40%. Now, as technology really rises, the limit case of this is for 100% of shares to go into the social equity fund. So suddenly then we have a market communism, in the sense that, all profits are distributed across everyone, right? And everybody in there, those who work in the companies effectively work for society. Now, what is their incentive to keep working? Well, they get quite good wages. Wages don't have to be the same. And imagine a situation where in these corporations, once all shares have gone away, all shares have been socialized, all decisions are being made on the basis of a one person, one vote, from secretaries to CEOs. Then you have a completely different system, which is, for me, it's market communism or socialism, call it whatever. So I'm answering this in order to show that technology on its own is not enough, but the combination of socialization and technology can lead to my ideal world, which I have to admit, and I keep telling people and they laugh their heads off, is Star Trek. You have a replicator in your room and you say, I want food, a car, not a car, an electric car, whatever, it comes out. And nobody works. Everybody is in the agora and explores the universe or ideas.
Cool. Perfect. Miry. But Miry, you need to silence yourself, unmute yourself, please. No,
it's like San Simon, the fish that goes in the river, ready to. That's your utopian dream of technology, in a way.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, we will have the technology. Yeah. The question is, are we going to have the democracy, which is necessary for us to share the fruits of the technology, or are we going to have a dictatorship that uses the technology in order to abuse everyone else? Because, let's face it, the will to power and to exploitation is quite independent of money. Why does Jeff Bezos want more money? He wouldn't even notice it. Even if I were to give him today 10 billion, it just would be a drop in the bucket. For him, all that matters is the capacity to make you and me do things he wants. It's a question of power. So capitalism is alienating people. And there's a beautiful passage in volume 1 of Capital by Marx, in which he goes radical humanist on us for a moment. And he starts lamenting the tragedy of the capitalist. He starts feeling for the capitalist because, you know, he thinks he needs to exploit the workers, because if he doesn't exploit the workers, then he may go bankrupt and become like them. So he ends up not sleeping at night, finding new ways of exploiting them and destroying his own soul while doing it. He has no time to enjoy a single penny he makes, right? And in the end, he's even more of a sad bastard than the proletarian that he exploits. So this is, you know, this is a matrix-like dystopia where the whole of humanity has been taken over by its own machinery, and no one enjoys it. No one enjoys the fruits of what they do. I don't know Bezos, but I suspect he's a very sad bastard.
We hope he is.
No, I don't. I'm a humanist. I want people to be happy. I just don't think you can be when you've got 140 billion.
184.
84 billion, you know.
You missed like the last quarter.
You know, I don't think you can be happy. I mean, you know, it's like Midas. Who will ever love you? Anyway.
We love you only for your money. Okay, can I ask you a more local question?
Please.
As a Marxist, which you just, what are in your view the economical aspects of the occupation apparatus in this area?
Well, you know better than me. I find the occupation of the Palestinian lands a major source of personal pain to me. And personal pain, again, in a dialectical sense, because in one of the projects of my wife, we actually walked across most of the wall, Shalom's wall, or separation.
You walk, I didn't hear you.
Along the wall, from Ramallah.
The wall, yeah.
And so forth. And we also did the same thing between US and Mexico, the same wall. We saw many Israeli companies building part of that wall there. Sure. Now we see this wall being built in between Greece and Turkey by the same companies, you know, Texan Israeli companies. Yeah. This, you know, the separation, the architecture of occupation is mind-boggling. The way in which roads are utilized as barriers. The comparing and contrasting the roads that lead to settlements with the roads that lead to Palestinian communities. Look, I have to say that I think you know what my position is. I think that, you know, the sooner we end that separation and bring down that wall, the better. I have a position which, in my own party, is a minority position. I've lost votes on this, both in the Greek party and in the pan-European DIEM 25 party. I'm against the two-state solution. I think it's too far gone. I'm of the Edward Said school. We need one state for everyone. It's, you know, maybe once upon a time, it will be possible to have a two-state solution. I don't think we can anymore. You know, I think, yeah, the people of a Jewish descent have to have complete safety in that state, but so do Palestinians. And I don't think that you can buy safety as Jews by means of walls and occupation. I just think that a wall, by construction, creates in its shadow, both sides of it, in both its shadows, insecurity. In the name of security, it spreads insecurity and poisons the human soul.
Okay, but this is an opinion
It's
about
a minority position.
What?
It's a minority position in my own party.
Yeah, but it's, you know, this I think a minority position is actually shared by, I believe, a significant part of our audience tonight. I mean, but I want to ask you something more specific about the current situation, and if you can, you know, because the Marxists would put everything on the economy, right? So could you see anything in terms of the occupation apparatus, which is economical, which is, you know, let's say, changing it would threat local capitalism? I'm asking.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Look, I am a Marxist, but I'm an inconsistent and very erratic Marxist. And I'm certainly, you know, most Marxists hate me, and I dislike most Marxists. So, you know, full disclosure here, right? Most Marxists think that I am not, that I'm a bourgeois sellout, because I'm not a reductionist. I don't believe that everything can boil down to the economy, right? I think that the human beings are perfectly capable of creating superstructures in their minds that prevent even the accumulation of capital to be maximized.
Yeah.
I don't think that what you have in Israel and Palestine is can be explained in terms of exploitation of surplus value. Surplus value exploitation does come into it. It reinforces what you already have. So there's no doubt that, but in a sense, you know, the wall reduced profitability of Israeli capital because it reduced the free flow of labor.
Of course.
You know, in South Africa, the whole idea of apartheid was to have them all blocked in there, but at 8 in the morning, they come out, they work, and they go back. So when you have a whole ideology of the wall, that is not consistent with capital accumulation maximization. So I see it here in Greece. I see people who are prepared, you know, exploiters, capitalist exploiters, in small scale capitalist exploiters who prefer to reduce their profits in order to indulge their racism.
Yeah, so there is something above capital, which is...
Yeah. I mean, look, the capitalist accumulation process does reinforce racism, but it can also exceed it. It can surpass it. It can acquire a life of its own, which then jeopardizes capital accumulation.
Okay. Okay, I go on, and in relation to that, I want to ask you something about the surveillance society. Okay. We see a huge amount of surveillance right now around the world, and in particular in Israel. And the state of emergency made it possible for our government to completely ignore privacy and human rights issue and implement existing surveillance technology that were previously reserved only for allegedly security threats in the occupied territory. And I want to ask you, where do you see the balance between security and freedom? And in particular, if you can remark about these new measures for security that kind of are imported from one realm, which is, let's say, entre guillemets, security to the realm of safetyness, healthiness, etc.
Well, security, whether it's against a virus or an enemy, real or constructed, has always been the tool of authoritarians and profiteers. If you look at what happened after 9/11, you know, most of the things they make us do in airports has nothing to do with our security. It's got to do with machinery that has been sold and needs to be replaced, which is extremely lucrative for those who sell it. And we still have them, and we will have them forever. So a lot of the things that have now come into play, all the apps and gadgets and various security devices and networks that have been created now, with some utility during the virus, during the pandemic, they will stay afterwards as well, as long as there is money to be made, and as long as power grids are reinforced by it. Because as I said before, you know, the urge to control the population has always been an essential aspect of every government, especially authoritarian governments. Even if there was no security problem, they invented in order to enhance their own power over the population. My great influence when it comes to surveillance capitalism, to this whole big brother franchise and structure is my great friend Julian Assange. I followed Julian before you knew him, when he was a kid, a very young man in Australia. And I remember how impressed I was by his very simple idea against 1984, against an Orwellian society. And his very simple idea is to create a digital mirror and turn it onto the face of Big Brother. So that, we're not Luddites. We shouldn't be Luddites. We should not be in favor of destroying the gadgets of the system, but we should create our own gadgets or take their gadgets and turn them against them so that we can see what they're doing. So we can watch them watching us. And, that really pisses them off. That really annoys them. So, that's the whole point of WikiLeaks, of using their technologies in order to expose to the world what they're doing on our behalf without our knowledge. So that's, we need
counter-surveillance. That's the weapon that we are going to introduce as
counter-surveillance. That's right. Know that he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. If you are surveying other people, you will be surveyed, and suddenly you will not like what you see out there on the internet.
Thank you. Ori, want to bring another question from the audience?
Yeah. Please, there are plenty of very good questions. So I'm sorry, we don't have enough time for everybody. So I'll just randomly pick them because they're really great. Itai Talmi is asking, what is or should be the role of art and design disciplines in the reshaping of economy, political, social systems?
Well, I began answering this question before, saying that my own understanding of the world, of the economy, would be impossible without art, literature, theater, music less so, but music has a capacity to do things to your mind surreptitiously without you realizing it. To the extent, look, the way I understand the world is this. It's a very complex place. Society, nature, and so on, particularly society. You put two people together in one room and you have more complexity than in the whole of the universe because of the absolute indeterminacy of the human dialogue. The way I look at you, looking at me, looking at you, looking at me, looking at you, looking at me. That is infinitely complex. So mathematics, analytics, rationality can only get you to a certain point. There are limits to how much you can understand what's going on through mathematics and analysis, science. When you hit that limit, what have you got left? Art. For me, art is what happens when you exhaust the limits of analysis. But you don't exhaust the capacity of the human brain and the human mind to explore playfully your ignorance, and through this exploration to limit it. It would allow me to something that just occurred to me. Suppose I was an extraterrestrial, or you were an extraterrestrial, and you arrived in Nicaragua in 1985, and there are people fighting. There are the Sandinistas and there are Contras, and they look the same. They're all Nicaraguans or people from nearby. They have more or less similar weapons, and they're shooting the hell out of each other. How would you tell who is who? What's happening? Who do you side with? I mean, who do you think? How do you assess the two different sides? I think you listen to the music that they listen to. You will have a far better grasp of who these people are. Just the music. What do they draw if they doodle on a piece of paper? What do they doodle? So for me, art is not. You see, I mean, most people on the right and some on the left too have always treated the art as a luxury, as something nice to have to. A little bit like good manners in a military academy. So, if you are training to be an officer in the army, it's good to have good manners because, the president of the republic may invite you to dinner. And then you have to know which fork to use and which spoon and, how to wipe your mouth and all that. But it's not essentially the battlefield. In the battlefield, if you're polite, you're dead. So, so it's, something good to have, but not essential. This is not how I see art. I see art as an essential tool in understanding the world and in implementing changes upon the world.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you very much for that. Miry, do you have anything? I got plenty of questions still to go, and we still have a bit of a time. So, Miry, is anything special you want to ask?
You ask me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking on the audience question right now.
Victor Levy said something very correct. The Nicaraguan revolution is yet another leftist revolution that has gone terribly wrong. Victor, you're absolutely right. Great pain. But what can we do? The French Revolution went wrong. The Russian Revolution went wrong. They've all eaten their children. But, this is why we have to combine revolution with, as the Spanish anarchists used to say, we have to have the red of revolution in our heart, but also the black on our flag to remind us of, the dark side of human nature.
Brilliant. Maybe to continue this kind of thing that we talk about arts and maybe something which is a big concern today would be, and I see it's a kind of a line that goes between the questions that we've been asked, is I think people feel very powerless today, especially maybe in Israel. You feel very powerless about the big things that happen around you. What do you think people can do? Like how? And it seems like something that is going around. Not only here, but around the world. You see the left, or you see not even the left as much as, the very humane idea of looking at life. In this sense, even the academy, in a way. What do you think? What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that it's really very easy to lose heart. Extremely easy to lose heart and to feel lonely. I remember when I was a young leftist, I was around 15, 16, I was so much influenced by an anarchist. I wasn't an anarchist, but I actually liked the anarchists because they gave me ideas. I remember back then in 1975, whenever it was, we had just come out of a fascist dictatorship. And of course, it was full-on explosion of democratic marches and protests and this and that. That's how I cut my political teeth. And I remember back then, because we were under NATO, we had an American-led dictatorship. It was all about, the greatest enemy is imperialism and anti-imperialism. I remember seeing on a wall a piece of graffiti that read, comrades, besides imperialism, there is also loneliness, with the anarchist sign. And I remember, I thought, how right that is. I remind me also of the song by the Beatles, Eleanor Rigsby. And you will excuse me, but my wonderful partner is giving me a glass of vodka. So
let's drink. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers. Listen, look, I have metaxa.
She's having metaxa. Okay.
A little bottle from 2 years ago.
So I think the answer to your question is we need to do things like what we're doing now. The dialogue, dialectics, getting together. The only thing that can defeat loneliness is not being alone, but at the same time not being monads lost in a crowd. And the only way that we can do that is through this exchange, when you reflect into the other's eyes and you recognize yourself for the first time.
Yeah.
I see that there are a lot of questions regarding currencies in the oh, cheers.
Okay, let me spare you this and get this out of the way because I've seen these, you know.
About cryptocurrency, about the Bitcoin.
Wherever I go in the world, wherever I go in the world, there is always a question about Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies. Is this going to be what liberates us? The answer is no. You know, no, there are no technical fixes.
But is it because there is a limited amount of Bitcoin? I mean, that it cannot go to infinity, or is there a deeper reason?
Look, when the algorithm for the blockchain came out, because I understand coding, I can read it. I read it and I thought it was fantastic. It was such a, you know, it's a wonderful piece of work, right? I wrote an article and I said that back then I read it and I said, okay, well, this is not money. I said it's a fantastic solution to a problem we have not discovered yet.
That's for sure.
So it's a system of decentralized checks and balances, which is very appealing to Democrats and to anarchists and to
also cutting out the states.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. But money can never be apolitical. You see, the idea of Bitcoin excites people in the same way the gold standard is. That, you know, gold is God-given or, you know, nature-given. It's there, it's in the ground, no one can create it. Alchemy has failed. So no one can actually control the quantity of gold. Therefore, if money is gold, then, you know, the rich and the powerful and the central banks and the government cannot control our money. That's rubbish. Because, you know, money, as Marx said, is the alienated capacity of humanity. It's an abstract thing. It's the most artistic, abstract economic concept, money, right? It's not a commodity. Anyone who imagines it as some kind of metal or digital metal or, you know, units of Bitcoins being, you know, sort of attracted together in a blockchain has missed out the whole point about money. Money under capitalism is power. It's a social relationship. You can only understand it as a social relationship. You cannot understand it. You cannot write the mathematical equation by which to understand it. It is impossible. In the same way, you cannot write down a mathematical relationship by which to understand the relationship between the capitalist and the worker. Yeah? There is something in there which is mathematical. What's a wage? Right? You can write down the wage. It's, you know, $300 a week, whatever. Okay, but then that's irrelevant because the real fun, the really interesting relationship between the capitalist and the worker starts after they've signed the contract, once the worker goes into the factory, the office, the whatever, the warehouse, the shop. That's where you have a social relationship. And that you cannot write down as mathematics. See, that social relationship has a monetary equivalent, which can never be written down. And, you know, when you have, take for instance, the coronavirus situation now. Imagine if we had Bitcoin. Complete catastrophe. Because you can, you know, it is essential, even whether it's socialism or capitalism, that you can increase the amount of money when economic activity goes down to replace incomes, okay? Otherwise, you will have bankruptcies, people will die, and then if they die, they can't work, and they cannot...
State involvement, in your opinion, or international involvement?
I think both. I think both. I think, you know, in my ideal world, I'm actually writing a book now, which I have to finish by the 29th of May, which is killing me because, you know, I'm doing all sorts of other things. And I've got, you know, some like 30 pages to finish and they're very difficult. But the whole point of this is it's like a utopia book in which I will somehow write down, I've already done that now, I need to finish, how I would see, the book is called Another Now. So it's all about how, you know, how could we be doing things differently with the current technologies, not with Star Trek technology. So in that, I have described the world in which there are local currencies, you know, municipal currencies, national currencies, regional currencies, national currencies, and an international currency. The international currency in my world is not one you have in your pocket. No, it doesn't exist, never gets printed. Nobody uses it. But all international trade and all capital flows around the world are denominated in this international currency. And whenever there is too much of a flood of money from one country to another, a proportion of that is kept in an equity fund, world equity fund, which goes to the most underdeveloped countries. Similarly, if there is too much of a deficit, trade deficit, or too much of a trade surplus, again, a proportion is confiscated and goes to the underdeveloped world. That international currency unit has an exchange rate.
In fact, an algorithm can run this policy, no?
Blockchain.
The blockchain algorithm.
My book is a blockchain.
Is a blockchain. Okay. That's,
but similarly, you have local currencies like that. You've got national currencies. But of course, then the government can, or in the case of the global currency,
print more money. You
can create more money. Depending on ups and downs, a meteor can hit us, then we need to boost it. We can't leave it to a pre-existing, preordained algorithm to do it.
Yeah. So in a way, you are this part of capitalism, you adopt the part that.
In my book, there's no capitalism.
No capitalism, but you can still create.
There are markets, but no capitalism.
I see.
In the sense that it's closer to what I was saying before: one member, one vote in companies, and no share markets.
That's cool. Miri, I want to leave the blockchain for a minute and the brilliant idea.
No more blockchain.
And the brilliant idea of local currencies and giving communities their own currency in order to empower them to control their lives. To go to something, we got a question from the early stages of this conversation from Yuval Rosin. He's asking, I would love to hear Mr. Varoufakis' stance on worker unions and their position and role in our times. This is from the early beginning of the conversation.
Look, trade unions were the beginning of defending civilization from capitalism's encroachments. The first trade unions were heroic and essential, and they made life bearable. But at the same time, like everything, they tended to degenerate. In countries like the United States, they became amenable to the mobsters, as you know. In Britain, they created a political party, the Labour Party, that became entrenched in the system, and the trade unionists became reproducers of capitalism, with them at a key position for distributing power within the working class. So the working class was kept in its place, with the trade unionists benefiting from the act of redistributing some monies within the working class and between the capitalist class and the working class. So they are essential. They are necessary, but they're not sufficient.
All right, thanks. Another question that we have before running out of time completely. Galit Welner is asking, can we imagine today the end of capitalism? My question is following Jameson's statement that it's easier to imagine the end of the planet than the end of capitalism, which is brilliant, by the way, because this coronavirus is just like showed us that markets can stop.
Yeah, Arundhati Roy wrote a beautiful piece, of all places, the Financial Times, in which he said that this moment in history is like a portal. We enter it, we can keep dragging the carcasses of our dead ideas and assumptions, or we can, alight of them and, imagine a different world. And this is why, I'm writing this book, Another Now, and all that. The beauty is that people can now start asking big questions. The question is, for how long? Because, we had that moment in 2008. In 2008, a Greek word which I really love is aporia, A-P-O-R-I-A, A-P-O-R-I-A, aporia, you would say, which in modern Greek means puzzlement. You think, oh my God, what's happening here? But in the ancient Greek original etymology, it means lack of a walkthrough, the impossibility of of penetrating, of going there and moving somewhere else. And, you know, the world had that aporia in 2008. But as soon as the powers that be, the authorities, on behalf of the oligarchy without borders, regained control, the world resembled a speeding driver who get caught by the police. They get a fine for, you know, 10 kilometers, they drive slowly, and then they say, oh, bloody hell, you know, and they go for it again. So, for how, you know, I'm not, people who keep telling me now that this coronavirus thing is going to change the world and nothing will be the same again. I hope that's true and that what's going to follow will be better, but I'm not at all confident. I very much fear that in, you know, it will take some time, but in 3 years' time, the airlines will keep flying, consumers will be back. Very few of us will remember a time when capitalism could be imagined, you know, as unnatural. Because this is the problem with capitalism. It's such an unnatural system, such an irrational system. And, you know, this is why I can't stand the left. Because the left has given up on the critique of capitalism as an irrational system, as an inefficient system. You know, I keep social democrats telling me that, oh, capitalism works very well, but the problem is that it is unfair. What? It works, you know, as if it was a created disaster. You know, if you think of the way we're wasting resources, human beings, the planet and so on, it is an absolute catastrophe. And the left has adopted the narrative that it is efficient and rational, but we need to, I don't care about equality. You know, I wrote an article back in the 1980s against equality because I was so angry with the left. You know, once upon a time, those of us who became feminists, anti-racists, Marxists, we did this because we wanted to liberate people. We care about freedom. We didn't care about equality. And, you know, I mean, I don't give a damn about equality. Inequality is the repercussion of exploitation and of the inefficiency of capitalism. You end up with inequality because capitalism is so inefficient. It's a side effect. The problem is that it enslaves people and it is stupid. It's a stupid way of running society.
Yep, Miri, one last question.
Okay. So my last question is going to be the question of Ronen Edelman, our friend, who asked, what is the place of education in your utopian world, maybe in your new book? Is there a place, a specific place for education? I mean, no. No.
Education should start when you wake up and just before you go to sleep. Maybe in your sleep, hypnotherapy, hypno education. Education should be, you know, I mean, what is education? I'm not talking about, you know, learning a trade or learning skills. I really don't care about skills. In the ideal society, no one should have skill. The machine should be doing everything, and we shouldn't need skills. Unless skills is, you know, playing the piano, you know, or, but you know, for me, education is culture, it is literature, it's mathematics, it's, you know, knowledge, just the privilege of having the time to understand, to know, to create. That's education. So education should be everything. There should be no place for education.
So there should be only education.
Only education, you know, which of course goes hand in hand with culture, with mathematics. So for me, this is one thing.
Brilliant. Mr. Varoufakis, thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. It was such a great change from, you know, having these Zooms that are all about party policy and what do we say about the migration crisis and the banking system. But it's a dirty job, somebody's going to do it.
So if there is one thing that you can recommend to us to do as a society which is in, or as people that are really in, under the situation of distress, and what would that be?
Well, poetry, music, good literature, art, and lots of Star Trek.
Great.
Thank you very much for your time. I'm very sorry for everybody that was asking questions, brilliant questions, by the way, in the chat. We couldn't, don't have enough time to answer everything and everybody. Thank you very much, Yaanis, for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope to see you, up close and personally at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.